Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Haight, and I'm here from the Social Media Special Interest Group for MCN. Feel free to Slack us later if you're interested. And I'm really excited about today's presentation on the tool petting zoo. If any of you are like me, I'm sure you are really eager to learn some more organizational tools for all of the work that you do. And now I'll hand it off to Janice.
And I'm Dennis Craddock, chair of the Information Technology SIG. We're just a group of members of IT departments throughout various museums. And so we have a wide variety of interests and are excited to see some of these tools that they are using in this presentation.
I can kick it off. And first, I just wanted to also introduce Heather. She is our volunteer. Heather, if you want to wave in there, and she'll be managing chat and also helping out with breakout rooms, Heather. So thank you, Heather, for supporting this. So before we get kicked off, we just wanted to introduce the panelists, and I can go first. My name is Andrea Ledesma, and I'm the digital product specialist at the Field Museum, which is a natural history museum in Chicago. I work on the web and digital engagement team, and we have been remote predominantly since March 13th. The museum has been open again since about July 17th, but I've been here since. Our museum is about 500 employees, but over the summer we did lose about 20% of our staff due to layoffs. Just some background too on our team. Digital is distributed across various disciplines and departments. I think that is a reality a lot of us know in museums. So while we predominantly at fieldmuseum.org, the museum's main website, and other digital storytelling projects, we work with digital colleagues in education and IT, all with specific needs and audiences and workflows, and bringing them all together has been quite the fun challenge. I'm actively using Airtable, which I think is no surprise to anyone joining this session, but I'm also using Slack, Google Suite, and Jira and Zapier, which we'll get into. And I'm also actively learning Jira still, and that has also been a great time. I'm going to pass it off then to Dana.
Hi, everyone. Before I introduce myself, I think if everyone could engage the chat and give Andrea a happy birthday shout or cheer or dance. Yay, happy birthday. Not only is she like running this whole conference, but also turning another lovely age. So happy birthday, Andrea. I'm Dana Allen-Greil. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman in my early 40s, and I am wearing the best $6 I ever spent blue light blocking glasses from Amazon and a tealish shirt. I'm the director of digital strategy at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. The aquarium is we just celebrated our 36th our birthday anniversary. And it typically attracts about 2 million visitors per year, 80,000 plants and animals. We've been closed since March, and we have no reopening date on the horizon. I would not say we have all been working remotely, because there's a ton of people who are caring and feeding for our animals and plants and water quality. But we have suffered pretty big layoffs, almost a third of our team. So really, really tough times there. We are very like admission revenue reliant. So we've had a $50 million budget deficit already. Digital is in a lot of places. It's mostly in marketing officially, but obviously also our education folks and lots of other folks are either involved or actively running their own digital programming that we support and help engage people in. We have about 10 folks who work on content and design for web, email, and social. And we are actively using Airtable and have been for about a year. Teamwork is what we use for project management. I don't love it. We use WebEx Teams for video meetings and chat. I also don't love that. And then G Suite for saving and creating collaborative docs. For most of what we are writing is in Google Docs. So that's me. And I'm going to pass it off to Hannah. Oh.
Hi there, I'm Hannah Ostroff, and I work in the Smithsonian Institution's Central Office of Public Affairs, also known often colloquially as the Castle. Currently, I'm working in Newcastle's satellite Northern Virginia office, as I have been since March. A lot of our locations have, many of our locations have slowly reopened, others remain closed. And in my role in our central communications shop, I'm the day-to-day voice of the Smithsonian's Big Brand at Smithsonian channel. So doing the bulk of the researching, writing, editing, and monitoring for those social media accounts. I work very closely. We have kind of a team of two, depending on how you cut it, with our social media strategist who's at the central office. We also have a marketing department and other public affairs folks who work with us. And then because the Smithsonian is a vast and semi-centralized place, there are also communications professionals and social media managers across the institution at various museums and research centers who I work closely with. And in terms of tools, I've been using Airtable for a little while now. Also, of course, always on Google, and Sprout is our primary social media management platform. And I'm going to turn it over to our other Hannah.
Hi everyone, second Hannah here. I'm Hannah Zuber. I'm the archivist for visual materials at the Chicago History Museum. I've been at CHM since early 2019, and I manage the museum's archival collection of still and moving image. CHM is Chicago's oldest cultural institution. We were founded in 1856 as the Chicago Historical Society, and that is still our legal entity, but we rebranded to the Chicago History Museum in 2006. We are home to more than 6.5 million still images and about 4 million feet of moving image as well. I've been working remotely since March 13th. The museum closed to the public March 15th and remained closed only to essential staff for several months. We also reopened in mid-July. So since then, I've been maintaining 2 days on site and 3 days working from home schedule. The museum recently decided to close to the public on Mondays as a cost-saving measure, but so far we have been able to avoid staff layoffs and furloughs. The museum has a total of right around 100 employees, 150 if you include contractors, volunteers, and interns. The archives is part of the collection department. We have 2 permanent archivists, myself, and then my colleague who manages our manuscript collections. And we also have kind of an abnormally large project staff right now. We are working on several major projects, and I will be talking about one of them in relation to Airtable today. And we're actively using Airtable, G Suite, and your basic Microsoft suite as well. So I'll kick it off to Sierra.
Hi, folks. My name is Sierra Van Ryck deGroot. I am the Education Programs Manager at Poster House. We are a brand new design history museum in New York dedicated to the global impact and culture of posters, which is incredibly exciting. Who would have guessed? We have been closed since March 13th. It happened very abruptly, and we reopened the museum to the general public in late August, but most of the full-time staff are not back. We just have part-timers on site. We have about approximately 45 employees. It's changed since this slide was made. And we are all currently spread out over New York State, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania as we are working through this time. We have not laid off anyone at Poster House, but people have moved on to other things during that time. I am actively using G Suite and Asana and Airtable and Slack, and you'll hear a little bit about that here. I am currently learning Figma on my own, and that's been a journey. And let's keep it moving.
Yeah, thank you. I realize now I'm like, oh, we're all actively using Slack, not just everyone in this presentation. So, we'll all be experts in that by the end. So just an overview of what we'll have for the next hour and a half. The goal is to discuss how our respective museums are using Airtable and Airtable adjacent tools to facilitate work and promote collaboration across teams. We'll start by sharing our tools. Each of us will present a very mini case study of what it is that we've built for our teams and why. We'll get into the details of each of these tools. How much do they cost? How hard are they to use and to set up, and what is working and what isn't. We'll also talk about how our tools have changed and what's next as we're, again, actively learning and thinking about what's next and what else can we build. And then we'll break for Q&A with everyone in the current Zoom. For those who would like to stay and participate in breakout rooms, we'll also host that at the latter half of this deep dive. It's not mandatory. It's okay if you don't want to join. There's going to be a 10-minute break before those breakout rooms start. So you can grab some water, grab a snack, or step out. It's all your choice. So before we get started, I just want to give a very quick overview of Airtable. Very early on with the deep dive sign up, I think we pulled a few of you to see how many folks were using Airtable, and I think there's varying levels of expertise. So just as an overview, Airtable is like the best spreadsheet and more, or like a relational database. And you're like, Andrea, what does that mean? But when you have an Airtable, you have your workspace, which is your account, and every workspace contains a set of bases. So this particular base, I know Brett Dunn is on the call, he knows this well. It's our digital team task base. And within each base, you have a table. So that's what those tabs are. And I see they're very grainy, but I swear they're there. And within Airtable, there are particular records, and that's the smallest unit within Airtable. And that is your data. And as you can see, Airtable allows you to highly customize each of these records according to their fields. They are incredibly robust and very customizable. They have built into the software functionality you probably had in Google Sheets of like, oh, I wish I could do this, but I don't really know the formula. Airtable makes it easy to do so. I believe their mission is like democratizing software and no coding, coding without code. So the idea is that they want your data to be, they want you to be able to link your data and use it in the way that is most helpful to you. So you'll see as we walk through each of these case studies, how it is we've used Airtable to build very specific tools to fit our specific needs, and how Airtable just keeps on growing and how it's plugged into the other tools available to our team. I think it was mentioned in the plenary panel this morning that like the best tools are ones that are like easily adopted or universally adopted. And we'll talk a little bit too about like how we get staff investment or staff interest in these systems that we're bringing them into. So to get us started, I think Dana's going to show us how she uses it at the aquarium.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you just for now screenshots of 2 different ways we've used Airtable, and then when we do the breakouts, then we'll have a chance to like really pull it up and dig in. I think it's really hard to explain Airtable, so Andrea, you did a really good job, but I think until you really kind of see it in action, it's hard to understand how powerful it is. So the very first time we used Airtable, we had just like this massive spreadsheet. It was a content audit of all the pages and PDFs on our website. And we knew that we wanted to go through literally every single page on the website and decide if it was good to migrate to our new CMS, if it needed work, if we could just not bring it over, because we manually rebuilt every page in our new CMS, which was super fun. And so we started with like an Excel spreadsheet and just found that really difficult. So we used Airtable to kind of catalog everything. We also had a separate blog and a separate newsroom microsite. We wanted to merge all of those into one. So we're talking probably 1,500 web pages at this point. We used Airtable to audit all of that content, and we had, you'll see sort of a keep, update, remove, add kind of categorization. But then we were able to also use it to manage review of content, the status of the design, if a stakeholder elsewhere in the institution needed to review it, had we sent it to them, had they approved it, was everything looking good technically, was it ready to publish, so sort of status. And we were also able to generate, which I'll also show you kind of, I can't think of the name, circle graphs, pie charts. Just had a little brain right there, to kind of keep our project manager and our senior leadership informed about where we were with this kind of massive migration project. So if you can go to the next slide. This shows you, this is kind of like the most basic of Airtable views, which is a grid view, which looks basically like a spreadsheet with like pretty color coding. So here I've got an entry or record for every single page. They all have unique IDs. We're cataloging what's the new title. Are we going to migrate it? Is it a new page we need to create? Which template is it going to use, etc. There's a lot more I can show you in the breakout if you're interested. And then the next. So this is just showing you how you can visualize any of your records, lots of different ways. You can do Gantt charts and bar charts and pie charts, and I don't even know what else. And then what this is showing you on the right is, for example, you can see that the vast majority of that bottom pie chart, the vast majority we migrated as is, a big chunk we updated, and a big chunk we create about 25% brand new pages. The chart at the top shows that I could report out, hey, the bulk of our work is actually on the animal pages, and these are the staff we need to work on this. And also educators. I think there were some misperceptions about which parts of our website had the most pages and how much work it would be. So this was a really easy way to kind of visualize for people the shape of the project. Next slide. So we loved Airtable so much for this that we also decided once we shut down in March that we needed a better content calendar across platforms. In the past, we were like a little bit siloed, collaborating a little bit between web and social and email. Once we closed and we were so digital forward, we realized we just needed to be a lot more integrated. So for that, we really needed a way to see multiple platforms in one place on a calendar, identify publish dates, content lead, design lead, and link out to related documents like the draft content, or if we had a project brief or campaign brief, or to our project management system. And the next screenshot will show you what that looks like. So this is just another view in Airtable, is a calendar view. And the next slide shows a Kanban view. So there's lots of different ways with the same records and the same data in Airtable to just filter or view them based on what the needs of your team are. So that's what I will talk about in the breakout room if you're interested, and that's it for me. I think keep going, next slide.
Great, and I think I'm next. I apologize that it sounds like my mic was not up to snuff earlier. I hope this is a little bit better, and I'm also just gonna try to use my theater voice for a minute. So please do let me know if I need to be shoutier. Okay, Emily hates this is better. Thank you. So talking about social media management for my team at the Smithsonian. When I started about 5 years ago as the day-to-day social media manager, I was coming in, taking over from someone else who had been the lone person kind of doing day-to-day social for a number of years as well. And we have the good problem that we have a lot of content. There's a lot of things that you can do, but it's a really steep learning curve. There's the institutional knowledge of how many collections there are, what the research is that's ongoing, who your experts are, but then also things like what are past controversies, what are things that have done really well in the past. So when thinking about how do we do our day-to-day social, it's asking questions like, okay, well, what did we do on that holiday last year? And it's things like, okay, it's International Owl Awareness Day. Well, now I know that there used to be owls that lived in the castle. But and I'm ready to share that. But even as I got my feet under me in trying to learn all those things, it was also trying to remember, well, what did I post last year? And doing kind of a lot of just like Twitter advanced search for Thanksgiving and trying to figure that out. So on the next slide, there is, what I needed was one place that I could go and see everything that was Thanksgiving, and something that's different than just doing a collection search for the word Thanksgiving. Instead, something that's pulling social media ready content. It might not have Thanksgiving in the name. It might be an image of giant potatoes at the American Art Museum, or it might be a fossil turducken at the Natural History Museum, but things that I can use to do social media when I plan for next Thanksgiving. So if you go ahead to the next slide, please. We started using Airtable January of 2019, building out something that can help me and our team plan for every Thanksgiving. This is the fossil turducken, by the way. Every winter solstice, election season, Native American Heritage Month, all those recurring things that you need to mark on social media so that we can plan ahead for them. But also to think about, it's a Tuesday and I come in and it's not a hashtag holiday, it's not a historic anniversary, but I need to tweet something, which is sometimes how social media feels, that you're constantly feeding that. So something that can help for those days that you need something ready to go. So on the next slide, I have an image of the Airtable that I created, and on this tab, it's broken in seasonal content, and it's broken down in sections. We have things like Earth Day and Easter, and some of those overlap. We have a portrait of Julie Packard in our National Portrait Gallery that was started with us as an Earth Day story, but it's also a women's history story. So finding those intersections, and it also, allows me to track what the links are, if there's a blog post that these pieces are coming from, existing caption information. If I've already written it, I don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel next year. What part of the Smithsonian it's coming from, the museum or research center, and when I posted it last. And this has everything that we've done going back years and years, but it's also a living document that I continue to add to. And I think the other thing, next slide, please, is it helps us, we have a lot of content buckets that I think a lot of people when they're planning social media content do. For us at the Smithsonian, some of those buckets are making sure we have balanced representation for disciplines, art, history, science, culture, but also the parts of the Smithsonian are museums, big, small, research centers, are they in DC, are they not? And making sure that we keep that balance, we have all those different parts represented in our content. And it's also to be able to have something that doesn't just live in my brain. It's great that I have a decent memory for this kind of stuff, but we'd love for our team to grow. We have someone who recently joined who's focusing on women's history content, and it's been really great to have another person who can now use this tool, who can contribute to it, who can understand it. But also, if my role were to change, this is something that it's all down on digital paper, and it can live on after me. So in the next slide, it has our tab for what I've titled Evergreen Goodies. Here's just things that you can do on social media, so that I can say, hey, I know I haven't done anything about the Postal Museum in a while, so I can turn to this and I can say, oh, I want to tell the story about how people used to be able to mail their children, which is a good one. And it lets us, I feel, sort the data. As Dana said, you can slice it different ways. It really helps to visualize. Mailing coconuts is a great story. You can still, I think, do this, thanks to the Postal Service, that you can put a stamp on it. I don't know the exact postage amount, but put a coconut in the mail. And happy to share more in the breakout room if anyone wants to know about those things. But I think, this lets us plan ahead for those recurring moments on social media, but also be more nimble in the day-to-day. And then finally, I have, when the pandemic hit, we really shifted our social media attention. And on the next slide, you can see how I adjusted in Airtable. We wanted to think about how we could use the Smithsonian social media account to serve people to be part of the social media conversation, especially in March, in a meaningful way. And that meant, being able to find content that could offer a break while people were scrolling, but was still very mindful of the social media landscape that we're going to be a part of. So Airtable allowed us to adapt pretty quickly, pull in a lot of these data fields that were already in a different tab, and be able to say, okay, here we are, here's all of our content that we're ready to go, and we know we're going to keep it balanced, we know we're going to share these different units. And in a difficult moment, it was really helpful to be able to have this tool to turn to make my job, frankly, a little bit easier. So that's all from me.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to share a little bit about how my team and I use Airtable to manage requests of our time, both for the website, social, and the blog, as well as organize our work. So where I sit on the digital team, often we're fielding requests for content development updates, web features, and then something I'm calling something else entirely, which since closures has included things from like digital wayfinding and virtual programs. The reality of the Field Museum is that currently there are very finite, and I mean our team, editors for the website. So you can imagine there's like a constant influx of things to be built, written, or developed out. So Luckily, thanks to some other power users for Airtable on our team, specifically Susan Wagner and Caitlin Carney, we actually have an automated system built across Airtable and some other products that I'll get into that allows us to intake these requests, not unlike systems that are already built for that with like ticketing systems in terms of issues and feature requests. We built it to fit the particular fun and madness that is our museum. Also, I wanted to note too, throughout what I'm going to walk you through, these past couple of months have been an incredible stress test for systems, which I think are super important as more requests came in and as how we worked change. We actually had to take a step back of like, okay, it's great to have all of our workflows in one space and be able to reference them and have our records again in a central location. But we realized like where it is we hit the limits of Airtable and sort of reevaluated what else needed to be done, and then just sort of discuss of like how does Jira now plug into Airtable and how does this base plug into this base, which I think is a very important part of setting up any system. So just some needs we identified is that we needed to continue the process that we had of efficiently intaking digital requests. We wanted to be able to review and prioritize our requests accordingly and feed information to not on our teams, but to other folks as we needed to involve them. Because as we all know, we don't just work with our immediate teams, but we rely on a ready cadre of collaborators. So I am that girl at the Field Museum that says like, you filled out the form. So any sort of request of our team starts here. And in Airtable, much like the G Suite, you can build out a form very easily. That's our for web team assistance right here. But what's nice, again, as you saw with Hannah and Dana, is that because it plugs it in directly into Airtable, we're able to segment already the information very easily. So once someone submits a form, it comes into, once someone submits to the form, we get it in our incoming request tab. And we actually use Zapier, which is an kind of like if this, then that automation to duplicate the request in our individual trackers. This is sort of important to us because we want to be able to retain the original record, but then get very tactical with how it's done. And that's not always the fields that people provide for us. And it also allows us to take a step back and look at our work of like, okay, what's being requested of us and what else is on our plate and how we prioritize depending on like what they need, what are their goals for this, what's their deadline. There is a, sorry, I didn't do this sooner, but I really need this priority. And then we'll say like, all right, that's ASAP, or that's not as much of an emergency. I think we can get this done by Friday. And we just need to be able to go through that. I think offset it, like you're just checking off a to-do list you didn't make. Well, this is our sort of solution to that of like, okay, what actually needs to be done in a particular amount of time. And so we're not constantly watching this form. We set up an automated channel in our Slack instance that'll ping us whenever something is submitted. And even in there, we'll just start a thread of, hey, don't worry about it, or like, hey, please hold on this. This is actually tied to a larger piece. I'll fill you in later. And that all happens in our Slack. It's been really great. Every so often we will still get things of like, oh, this is actually the request for something larger, or this is the start of a bigger conversation. Or on the other side of that, we'll still reach out to us like individually, but it is really important. And we always consistently communicate that like, thank you for this. We'll look into it, but please, like the most efficient way for what you need done, it in directly into our workflow and allows every member of the team to evaluate it as needed. So what I mentioned earlier is we actually had to move away from Airtable and in some instances, and this actually our move to Jira started a little earlier before closure. Previously, we had Airtable set up to provide our website development tracker. It started with our agency in 2018 when we redesigned and was really helpful because we had built out like our roadmap and our epics all in Airtable, and we were able to ladder up that Airtable, just a nice dev tracker, and we were tracking our sprints, and we had our checklist for QA. It was all nice and tidy. But as our development became more robust and there was Airtable really lacked some finer point for record keeping and matching other pieces of information to a record. As an example, you can only go back into the commenting feature for every record, depending on your payment plan, which is not helpful if you're trying to track the development of a particular or look at the history. So we finally moved it out from Airtable into Jira, which is what you see on the right. We're liking it so far. It was helpful that we were able to just sort of recreate and had an understanding based in Airtable and moved it into Jira. It's also helpful that that is what Jira is built for, but there are still some features we're sort of weighing in between of like, well, this was actually nicer in Airtable. For example, the roadmap feature in Jira is not my favorite. I've actually been building out a different roadmap in Airtable just to sort of get used to like how things are laddering up to one another, and we'll move that into Jira later. I think, I don't remember if Hannah or Dana mentioned this, but like Airtable is also just sort of very fun and easy to test something out in terms of the system because of how flexible it is. And then you can sort of see it's like, oh, this might hold water and this might not, and I can move it into this different system. So other than Jira, we actually also had to reevaluate our content tracker, which is what you see here, and looks very much like Hannah and Dana's. Previously, when we redesigned, like this table was much more robust. We had like 3 tiers of review processes to hold. We had like resources, staff, and time for like a full content push. But as we sort of moved away a little bit from the redesign, as more like stacked up on our plate, we had to evaluate and realize like, oh, that same review process, that same like engagement with our collaborators is still in place, but we don't need to be as deep in the weeds in these particular records. So we kept those items and that workflow from 2018 and just moved it into the reality of 2020. So this is actually more, I'll go back, organized by quarter. And in that case, my colleagues, Kaylee and I, just sort of track, okay, like here's a particular need, here is in the website, who's on it, when do you need it done by, and who else do you need to engage. We have a very squishy category called complexity, which is also just a good flag of like how long might and how tricky might this wrangle with content, and that and our owners and what's on our plate and we're able to figure out like, okay, this is what can realistically get done by Q3, and maybe let's reevaluate Q4 at the start of it and we'll move on. So that's all for me, but if you want to get deeper into it, we'll be in a breakout room and can walk you through any of these tools. So Hannah Zuber, I think you're next.
Yes, thanks, Andrea. So I am just going to talk a little bit about our usage, CHM's usage of Airtable, just strictly as a non-relational single table database. And I think in a lot of ways we could have used Excel, but Airtable makes life so much easier for us. So our use of Airtable was specifically tied to a single acquisition. In 2018, the Chicago History Museum acquired the Chicago Sun-Times Photo Morgue collection, which they consider their collection of historic images, ranges from about 1940 to the year 2000. So this collection in total is over 5 million images. So it's one of the largest image collections that we have ever acquired, and it actually tripled our total image holdings when we acquired it. And it was a rather complex acquisition as well. We didn't acquire it directly from the Chicago Sun-Times. They had sold it to a sports memorabilia dealer in 2009. Long story short, he was convicted of wire fraud and then obligated to relinquish his assets. So we purchased the Sun-Times at that point, and it was kind of a mess. So we acquired the 35 millimeter film images, film strips that you see here. We also acquired some digital image surrogates, and the previous owner had also created metadata for roughly 1.5 million jobs. And when I refer to jobs, or when I say jobs, I'm referring to a group of photographs taken at one time or at a single event. So the image here to the right is indicative of a single job. So a job can have 1 or 2 images, or it could have several hundred images. So the way that we're managing the Sun-Times collection is from a job level / folder level, not item level. So one job is equivalent to 1 record in Airtable. So we knew we needed a centralized database to manage all of this folder level metadata for about 250,000 photo jobs from this collection. Next slide. So our primary needs were kind of to manage the data, the metadata that we inherited, also create metadata for the part of the collection that we didn't have any, and make sure we were cleaning and standardizing that data to our specifications. We did not have really very many suitable tools at CHM. Like I said, this is the largest collection we've ever ingested, and we knew we needed to look beyond Excel or Microsoft Access, which are the two major tools that we use in collections. So our primary needs were kind of this low barrier to entry regarding technical knowledge. We didn't have a whole lot of time to learn a brand new tool, and we really had to get moving quickly. We wanted something cloud-based, something easy to use, an easy to use interface, and the ability to have multiple users working within the same database or the same table at once. And kind of our secondary needs were project management based. We started the project in spring of 2019 using Asana, and Asana worked pretty well for us for project tracking and task management, but we needed to figure out a way to cut costs back in June. So we figured we could use Airtable also for project tracking, and it's worked pretty well for us. Next slide. So this is just kind of a typical view of one of our bases. Like I said, we're using Airtable as a non-relational single table database, one record per line. We don't attach the digital images that we have within Airtable. If we did that, we would almost immediately go over our 20 gigabyte attachment per base limit. So I can talk a little bit more about some of the limitations that Airtable has as far as images, but we do store all of the corresponding images in Box. So we've created several data dictionaries and authority lists in order to standardize some of this data. You can kind of see some of them here. Column A is just a job. It's a unique identifier, the job number, the date, also pretty standard. We of course go by the date of the photos were created rather than the date that they were published, because the collection includes both published material and unpublished material. The description you can kind of see is pretty standard, but where most of the work for us lies. For example, if you look at record 554, the description is just pictures of general scenes of crowds, which is not really useful for us. We kind of want to know why the crowds are gathering, who was there, where it was. So a lot of the work our project staff is doing is really heavily research based to try to enhance some of these. We also have photographer field and subject fields. These are authority lists in order to standardize some of this data. The topics, our authority list is borrowed from the Chicago Collections Consortium, of which we are a part, and they're of course Library of Congress subject headings. And then on the next slide is just a slightly different view of the same data. CHM has a number of gaps in our visual materials collection. For example, a major gap that we have is in regards to the south and west sides of Chicago. These community areas lack significant representation in our collection as compared to like the Loop area or the north sides. And so we're actively working to address these inequities in our collection. So with this in mind, our long-term goal is to ensure that the entire Sun Times collection is browsable by location, more broad location data such as community areas or neighborhoods. And then also some targeted location data. For some jobs, we have exact addresses. So we want this collection to be as kind of accessible as possible from that perspective. And then the last thing I just want to mention of my overview is just the views feature, which has really come in clutch for our team. So if you look all the way to the left there, you can kind of see a couple names and assign dates. So I use the view feature to assign staff specific record groups to work on. So you can do that and just make sure that each individual is only seeing the records that they're assigned to work on. And I'm happy to talk more about views in detail in the breakout rooms because I love them. And that's it for me. Sierra, on to you.
Thank you so much. And please let me know if my internet is being difficult. We have a big drama queen router over here. So I have to start this off by saying Poster House is a brand new museum. Every other museum here has history, has been established. There is already status quo, and you were just changing and implementing systems. Whereas Poster House was like literally brand new. There was no system, there was no precedent to work off of. And one of the big things that we knew was that we really wanted to have a robust internship program. And we are going, I noticed the slides are, it's okay. So we had dreams of doing a super robust internship cohort, and education has been a huge priority for Poster House, and we've continued to keep it to be a priority. But we had to develop a brand new internship program, which for the educator in me and the systems person in me was exciting, because what better way to have a working system for yourself than to design it yourself? So we had to design this program from scratch, and we needed to manage applications, review them, and track them in the safest way possible. And this was even before COVID. We were just like, how are we going to collect all this information? As soon as the museum closed in March, we had to make some very quick decisions. The first one was immediately that we had to go virtual. All the internships had to go virtual, and we had to move the entire internship process virtually. So the Airtable actually ended up playing a much bigger role than it had initially was planned to. And I'm super excited I'm going last, because all of my lovely co-presenters have shown you all the great functionality of Airtable and have shown you the layouts that I can't show you, because our internship spreadsheet has all the sensitive information of the people who applied. So you get to see the beautiful functionality of Airtable in terms of the form. You've gotten to see the charts and graphs that they can do. You can see all of those things. And if you have ever tried to do a volunteer internship program, you know those things are essential. You know you need to be able to keep all of these things together, and Airtable just like did that. So our big goals were a clear applicant management system, concise applicant review system, and tracking applicants across that whole process. So next slide. So the first thing that I immediately knew that I wanted to put all of this on Airtable for is that Airtable does forms. And from those forms, they are directly linked back into your base. That is revolutionary, high key, amazing. Google does it, but not nearly as beautiful. The slide that you're seeing here is the 2020 Poster House internships application form. It's just the top of it. And the reason why this is important to me is because this was what interns saw when they were applying to the application. They had a beautiful visual image. You saw our logo. It was inviting. It wasn't just like a generic Google form. Like it had this like personalized look to it. And then you just filled out the application. After you get to the application portion, everything that they filled out went right into a base. And if you can go to the next slide. Everything that they had went right into a base. I can't show you the basic, the master base that I have, because the master base has all their information. But what I can tell you is that Poster House prioritized blind reviews during our internship process, because we wanted to really be serious about our diversity, equity, and inclusion plans. And we wanted to ensure that people were being judged on, not even being judged, people were being reviewed, and we're looking at like their qualifications as a person, looking at their responses to the short-term answers, the short answers. And we were looking for, you know, some key details as opposed to like where you went to school or like, you know, what you did. And so the form feature was such a huge deal, because then I could create things like this. We had a master document that had everything. This is your name, your address, your birthday, your phone number, your everything was on there. And then from that, as Hannah just very lovely mentioned, we had the fantastic option of putting in different views. So when I was sending out these forms, sending out all the information for all these applicants, I was able to not only take out pieces, but then I was able to kind of move things around so that they made sense. What you're seeing here is the 2 rounds of blind review. So you can see the major grid view. You see that there's 5 groups A through E, that we were able to send out to different reviewers. And they, as you may have noticed on the last slide, the names were not names of people. We decided to change the names of all of our applicants over to birds. It was easy to find birds in New York City and some outside of New York to make that all happen with. They were grouped by letter, and then this allowed us to kind of as Airtable moved, as I think Andrea said, Airtable is this masterful platform that you can really, it's like a spreadsheet, like times a million. And so we were able to kind of group these, move people around, and then we were able to move them into a battle royale round without even having to worry about moving outside of our Airtable base. And this also allowed us to track requests for feedback. I want to move over to what's next so that we can tell you things, but I'm happy to show you more in the breakout.
So I think, thank you everyone for sharing. Very quickly, we just kind of wanted to like round robin it in terms of, other things that we considered using and our challenges. And Dana, thank you for asking the question of how many people have used Airtable so far. I noticed that a few folks have been playing around with the free version. So maybe we could just talk a little bit about cost. I can start in that one of the most frustrating things for me for Airtable is that you have to pay per user rather than for an actual suite with X number of users attached, which really limits, depending on the resources available to your team or organization, how many people you can bring in. So oftentimes I do find myself of oh, this would be great to involve graphics in, but they have such a big team that we can't possibly carry those resources. So we end up moving part of the process into Google Suite because we know that they can access it, they've already used it, and figure out some way to then bring them back in. Did anyone else want to weigh in on how much they're paying currently to get all these features?
Yeah, so on that note, there's a lot, once you're in the pro version, there's a lot you can do with giving people read access, so that we've used read access judiciously, and you don't pay for that. Don't pay for that by user, and forms can be used by an unlimited number of people. So we try to make sure we can at least come up with views that make sense from a read-only standpoint. Airtable does give a 50% discount to nonprofits if you are on their website. And then we've been exploring upgrading to the enterprise version, because as people see it, like the content calendar, there are lots of people who don't actually have a whole lot to do with our content, but they are really intrigued and now want to start using it in other places in the organization. So we're looking at the enterprise version, and frankly, it still is by user. So it's not but at that tier, you get some additional functionality or capability, let me say, where you get an implementation manager and a customer success manager. We haven't done this yet, but they're in the process of trying to sell us on this. And I'm really intrigued because frankly, for me, I think Airtable is so powerful, but it's so flexible that you really have to have someone who's a great systems thinker and has time to set it up properly. And so an implementation manager at that enterprise level would actually meet with you, say, hey, what's your process? And they will actually just configure it for you, at least is what they're trying to sell me on. So I'm intrigued by that. And I do think for us, it's one of the limitations of Airtable that it's so open and flexible that we really have to take a lot of time kind of internally training our team on no, use this field this way. And if you use a tab versus a view versus a separate base, those are all things we're kind of having to learn on the fly rather than having someone who can represent the product and tell us what's the best way to do it.
I just want to say that we're using the free version, and I think we might get into this a little bit later, but being in quasi-government land, there are certain approvals to using platforms. I think we're experimenting with Airtable officially. So, I know some folks who filled out the survey said that they maybe were having to use Microsoft Teams, and I think I'm not trying to use SharePoint for anything. So this is moving things over into Airtable, but still doing it on the free level has been okay for us so far. But we're still using it a pretty small team.
And CHM is using Airtable at the pro workspace level, and we are also using it using grant funds to pay for it. And Airtable won't invoice or kind of break out different projects for you unless you're at that enterprise level that Dana was talking about. So for grant funded projects, Airtable can be kind of tricky depending on invoice documentation that needs to be provided to funders. And the only other thing I wanted to mention too, billing is done per user per workspace. So if you have one user in multiple workspaces, you're paying for that user twice. So just one more thing to kind of keep an eye on when if you have multiple workspaces.
I'm also curious too, in terms of bandwidth. Sierra, you mentioned that, like, yes, the part of the fun of like doing this is you can customize the system exactly to the way that you want to do it. But as Dana mentioned, that like it takes a fair amount of time and expertise. So like generally, how long did it take you to first build it and then get it to a point where you're ready to introduce it to others of like, okay, here it is, here's this thing?
Yeah, we've been using the pro version, just for everyone to know. And as Hannah and others have said, we pay per person. So it ends up being a chunky bill, but we also get a lot of credits because people come in and out. So we also have been riding that wave. But in terms of bandwidth, I will actually honestly say when I first introduced Airtable to Poster House, I was using it to plan my wedding, and I was doing it as like a spreadsheet. I was using the free version as a spreadsheet. I was like, this is just a fun spreadsheet that does groups. As I've like kept learning and reading and learning more about Airtable, it has like my understanding of Airtable has exponentially grown, and I like refuse to look at my old wedding Airtable because I'm embarrassed by like how I've used it. So there is absolutely a learning curve, but if you have the time and if you're one of those people who love just like tinkering around with platforms, Airtable will absolutely reward you exponentially if you can do that. I think learning about using the forms, learning about all these new things that they've added, such as automations. Automations were like my favorite new thing that they added, because now you can send out emails. Like you can update someone's status in your set and it automatically send out an email. And these are things that I've been looking for, things we've been waiting for. So I would say that this was a huge learning curve, but the payoff was great.
Thank you. I was actually going to say, like, all of MCN is for the virtual conference is built on Airtable. The automations is super important, and those charts that Dana showed are blocks, which are only available on the tier plan. They kind of function like, some of them at least function like a pivot table elsewhere, but that sort of functionality you can only unlock once you start paying. But yeah, automations, big fan. In terms though of time, I'm looking at what's up. So I'm actually going to speed through, and maybe we can open it up to some general audience Q&A before our break. But I just wanted to highlight first another Slack channel. Yay. So to keep the conversation going after this, I've set up Airtable _etc. in Slack. There's nothing in it quite yet, but we figured it's public, so please join it. If you're looking to continue the conversation, we'll open it up again too to folks who are on the waiting list, but we're eager to see how this channel might live on as like a museum-centered power users group for Airtable and all like wonderful product planning tools. In that channel, we'll also share the shareable version of the slides we have today. So just as a reminder, I'm going to open it up to Q&A very soon for some general Q&A. If you have a question, drop your name in the chat, and Heather, our volunteer, is going to keep an eye and call on you. And at that point, you can unmute your mic and ask the question. Or if you would prefer, just write your questions straight into the chat. At about 2:05, be generous, 2:05, we'll break for 10 minutes. At that point, you can stick around for breakout rooms or you can head out. Before the break though, if you are sticking around in breakout rooms, 3:05 Eastern, sorry, I'm in Chicago. So 3:05 Eastern for if you're on that time zone. Drop in the chat before break which breakout room you'd want, either room 1 or room 2, and this is the info for each. And then during the break, we'll sort you in, so when you rejoin, you can get in the room you want to be in. So question, looks like Michelle's first.
Hello. Has anyone here used Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Planner or anything? I'm trying to figure out how that compares to Airtable and some of the other products that you guys are talking about. Yeah, so I'd love to hear it if anybody's using them.
No, do you mean like Microsoft Project, but on 365?
Yeah, so there's Microsoft has Planner and Project, and it's got a whole series of things that we've already got that are part of our Microsoft Office suite. And one of the things that, while I love Airtable a little bit that I've played with it, I'm wondering if it might be better to use something that the entire organization actually has access to, which is why I'm kind of looking at that. But I don't know enough about it or people who use it to know if it's worth my while to really start getting into it.
I have not used Microsoft Project in many years or anything kind of Microsoft-y besides Outlook. But I will say one of the things that has not been particularly strong for me, and it may be a learning issue on my part, is a Gantt chart. Like there's a very basic Gantt chart idea in Airtable, but it seems to me to really rely on like a start and end date, and that's it, and not like dependencies and the layers that you might get in more of a like sophisticated Microsoft project style. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. A lot of what I personally want to accomplish are actually a lot of the things that you seem to be accomplishing with your Monterey Bay Aquarium content management, which is what I'm looking at. Part of the thing that attracts me to the Microsoft suite is that there is the possibility of getting things, tasks and things like that onto people's Outlook calendars, which would then set a reminder, which are things that I find to be really helpful. So I'm kind of looking for something along that lines.
Can I jump in and say something, even though I'm not a presenter? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think for me, in my experience, one of the critical challenges to these tools is getting your team on it, right? One person can't use these. So if there's a system like Office 365 that your whole organization is using, that's huge. And I think it's worth looking at. It's worth like investigating just because of the ease of getting everyone in your organization on board.
Yeah, Susan,
for us, that integration issue has been one of the major challenges with Airtable. In that, like, well, we're not on Slack, for example, so we can't use that lovely integration that Andrea showed you. And yeah, we're in a different project management system and we're like literally manually linking the two. So that part is not ideal. And I think there are ways to overcome it, but it's going to take work on our end.
Yeah, Susan, that's a really good point. It's something like we continuously try to work on at the field, like run a very similar presentation such as this with other departments of like sort of generated interest with like shared views of like, oh, here's what the web team is working on, exhibitions if you're curious, and trying to bring them in. But we are just like continuously thinking about like, well, if this team isn't using it, it's not a useful tool, right? Like if it's not helpful. So just trying to figure out, again, meeting them where they are and like, okay, well, if maybe this will work, or if they're interested, how much time it will just take to get staff buy-in and like shared learning with people you need in there.
So I think Erin had a question.
Hi. Yes, so my question was actually something that you didn't get to, which is about that institutional buy-in at the upper level. So I'm a temporary grant-funded project manager. And on my first day, I was like, hey, can we use Airtable? There was like a big wall that came down on that. I'm still officially experimenting with Airtable in the free version, and we're using it to organize a bunch of research. So it's just like another application for Airtable. But I guess my question for each of you is, what were your conversations like about bringing Airtable in as a tool, and what were some effective, what was your effective language?
I could start if no one else has current thoughts on this. In our case, actually, it was just like showing the thing to sort of like, hey, here's what it can do. I think a new tool is scary to some, and trying to like and adopt it of scary, but I think starting small and like, okay, well, maybe use the free version, maybe tinker around with it a little bit, get it to a place that would be helpful to them as well. And then you're sort of having the conversation from there of like, oh, imagine this at scale. Or especially if you're thinking about working with other teams, like bring them into that process of planning of like, hey, I'm working on something. I don't know if it's like, it'll stick, but I'd love your thoughts on that. I think it just, yeah, starting small was sort of helpful in that regard. But at the same time too, also just like, we did it because there was a free version, which I don't know if you're in the position to do or try.
Am doing.
Yeah.
If this was a Google Doc, I'd be anonymous troublemaker in this session.
Yeah, for us, I actually started our Airtable during the government shutdown, which is a hard and weird time, but I'm not a federal employee, so it was a situation where I was still working, but we weren't putting anything out on social media. So speaking to other people, how do you start something from scratch? Like I don't think I would have done it if it were not for having that time, but it was something where I was able to work more independently, as Andrea said, on a free version, and getting it to a place where it worked for me, and I could prove to myself, like, oh, this is going to change how we do everything. Then I could go and take it to my boss and say, here's where this is going to be able to make a difference. And I think that's starting small, and it sounds like you're doing that to be able to show how it works for you. And I think it can be really intimidating as a tool. So I think breaking it down to, it's a spreadsheet, look at the labels, you can color code it. Those things are always helpful.
So we have a question in the chat box from Jono for Hannah. They're curious to learn about how you connected the digital image asset to the Airtable records that you made. They thought that you mentioned a box.
Yes, yeah, and it's just as simple there as file naming. So each of the images that we hold in Box, the file name matches the job number. And so that's how we're able to tie the images that are hosted on Box to the metadata that's on Airtable.
Heather, are there any other questions?
Yes. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. So Susan is asking, how do you track dependencies in Airtable?
Susan, can you click?
I think we addressed that
Oh,
in the.
Yeah.
It was addressed.
I mean, I think that is something that I have not figured out the very best way. There are a couple other things I haven't figured out the very best way to do in Airtable. For example, you can one of the things we love about Airtable is you can drag and drop things up and down. But then if you kind of resort or look at a different filter, that like ordering doesn't carry over. So I've tried like literally manually numbering things. I've tried, you can have like a star ranking of like 10, if we're trying to, for example, have a priority list of like what needs to get done this quarter and in what order, those kinds of things there's probably 5 different ways to do that, and none of them are like exactly perfect.
Yeah, I think too that Airtable lets you link records to other records, which is super helpful. In the content tracker we had, for example, we can like say, okay, this exhibition page or this section of the website will include all of these pages, and vice versa, of like this page actually is dependent on all of these other sections of this content or in other sections of the website, right? But you cannot link records across bases as carefully. They just pushed an update earlier this year that allows you to share views, but we're not yet at the point, at least in Airtable or how I'm using Airtable, where like if something is marked done in one base or changes a status in one base, it changes its state in another base. I think it's getting there, and I hope so.
I think you can do it with an automation now.
Is it? Oh,
I think
see?
so.
There we go. But I know you can at least push shared views to a different base, which is helpful.
Yeah. And I would also say that like, yeah, the linked records are like a huge deal. And that's basically how we ran the entire thing, because you can literally start with a master sheet and then like go down into the minutia into the other ones. And so like you can have a big like unwieldy sheet, but then I think as Dana mentioned, like you can group things and you can sort things and then literally take that into another document and to go from there, which is how we actually ended up doing the anonymous, the blind reviews actually.
So I think we are at time. So thank you everyone for joining. I see a number of you have put which breakout room you'd like to be in. So as a reminder, if you'd like to do so, please drop that in before the break. You don't have to stay for breakout rooms, it's okay. But again, the shared Slack channel is going to be available. And thank you for joining if you are hopping off. But otherwise, we'll see you back here, let's say at 2:10. Or sorry, 2:10 Central Time. So it's a 5-minute break just so we can get some more time in the breakout rooms. I'm gonna go off camera and off mic, but I will come back around that in 5 minutes.